The bullet that killed Petty Officer Vasquez passed so close to Chief Hendricks that he felt the heat on his cheek before the man beside him dropped. No warning. No muscle flash visible. Just the wet sound of impact, and then Vasquez was gone, his eyes still holding the surprise that would never leave them. "Get down," Hendricks roared, but his voice was swallowed by the eruption of gunfire from 3 directions. The cove that was supposed to be their extraction point had become a kill box, and someone had known exactly when they would arrive. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed young people who surprised everyone with hidden abilities. Prophet rolled behind a volcanic boulder, his sniper rifle clutched to his chest like a lifeline. He had seen the muzzle flashes now. At least 40 shooters in elevated positions along the ridgeline. Professional spacing. Overlapping fields of fire. This was not some local militia caught off guard. This was a deliberate ambush executed with precision that spoke of serious military training. Another body fell. Kowalski. The breacher had taken 2 steps toward better cover and paid for it with his life. That made 2 dead in the first 15 seconds, and the gunfire was not stopping. Hendricks grabbed the radio, his fingers slick with someone else's blood. "Archangel, this is Blackwater 6. We are compromised. I say again, we are compromised at primary extraction, taking heavy casualties. Request immediate support." The response came through static and chaos. "Blackwater 6, Archangel copies. All air assets are engaged with diversionary contacts. Nearest support is 4 hours out. Advise you find cover and hold position. For hours. They will be dead in 4 minutes at this rate." Gecko screamed. The youngest member of the team had taken a round through the thigh, and blood was pumping out in rhythms that matched his racing heart. Prophet was already moving, dragging the wounded man toward a cluster of rocks while rounds sparked off the volcanic stone inches from their heads. The Japanese bunker, Lieutenant Commander Whitfield, shouted over the noise. He pointed toward the jungle line, where the crumbling concrete of a World War II fortification offered the only real cover within reach. 50 meters of open ground. It might as well have been 50 miles. Hendricks made the call in half a second. "Covering fire. Move on my signal. Everyone who can still walk, you run like your life depends on it." Because it does. Prophet propped Gecko against a boulder and raised his rifle. He was a sniper, not built for this kind of close-range chaos, but he would make every round count. Through his scope, he caught a glimpse of a man on the ridge, directing the others with hand signals. Calm. Professional. The man wore no insignia, but everything about him screamed military commander. The face disappeared behind cover before Prophet could take the shot. "Now," Hendricks yelled. The team moved. 6 men still able to run, 2 dragging wounded, all of them sprinting across black volcanic sand, while their brothers provided what pitiful suppression they could manage. Rounds kicked up sand around their feet. Someone grunted as a bullet found flesh, but kept running. Prophet was the last to move, walking backward with his rifle up, firing measured shots at any movement on the ridge. He felt a round tug at his sleeve. Another cracked past his ear. Then he was through the bunker entrance, tumbling into darkness that smelled of mold and old concrete and the copper tang of fresh blood. "Head count," Hendricks demanded. The answers came back grim. 2 dead at the cove. Gecko wounded bad, arterial bleeding barely controlled with a tourniquet. Reyes had taken a round through the shoulder, but was still functional. Morrison had fragments in his leg from a ricochet. Out of 12 operators who had inserted onto this island, they were down to 8 who could still fight, and their ammunition was not going to last. Prophet crawled to a firing position at a crack in the bunker wall. Through his scope, he counted hostiles moving to encircle their position. 40 plus. Maybe 50. They were spreading out with the patience of men who knew their prey had nowhere to go. "Chief," he said quietly, "they are not rushing us." Hendricks understood immediately. They were not rushing because they did not have to. They could wait. Star them out. Pick them off one by one whenever someone tried to move. The bunker was not salvation. It was a tomb with a delayed burial. Whitfield was on the radio again, his voice stripped of its usual command authority and replaced with something that sounded dangerously close to desperation. Archangel, Blackwater 6 Actual. We cannot hold for 4 hours. We are combat ineffective with multiple wounded. Enemy force is company strength with prepared positions. We need extract now, or there will be no one left to extract. The pause before the response felt like a century. Blackwater 6, we are working the problem. Hold your position. Help is coming. Empty words. Everyone in that bunker knew it. Help was 4 hours away, and they had maybe 40 minutes of ammunition if they were careful. The enemy had them surrounded, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. Every minute that passed was another minute closer to the end. Gecko groaned from the corner where they had laid him. His face had gone the color of old paper, and his breathing was too shallow. Without proper medical care in the next hour, he would bleed out despite the tourniquet. But there was no medical care coming. There was nothing coming. Prophet lowered his eye from the scope and looked at Hendricks. The chief was a hard man, 15 years in the teams, survivor of a dozen operations that should have killed him. But even he could not fight mathematics. Too many enemies. Too little ammunition. Too far from help. We are finished, Hendricks said into the radio, and the words hung in the bunker like a death sentence. Archangel, I'm telling you straight. Without a miracle, we are finished. 300 miles to the south, on an island called Guam, a 17-year-old girl with dark braided hair lifted her head from the radio receiver in her uncle's quarters. Her hands had gone still over the equipment she was not supposed to be touching. Her heart was pounding with a rhythm she recognized from long ago, from a shooting range in Hawaii where her father had first placed a rifle in her small hands and told her that some people were born to protect others. The coordinates they had mentioned. She knew that island. She knew those waters. And she knew, with a certainty that felt like prophecy, that she was the only miracle those men were going to get. Kaya Malama Tanaka had learned to hold her breath before she learned to read. Her mother, a champion free diver from the Big Island, had taken her into the warm Hawaiian waters when she was barely old enough to walk. By age 6, she could dive 30 feet without panic. By 12, she could hold her breath for 4 minutes. Now, at 17, she had pushed past 7 minutes in still water, her body trained to slow its heartbeat, to sip oxygen like a miser counting coins. Her father had given her a different kind of training. Staff Sergeant Keone Tanaka, Marine Scout sniper, had placed a rifle in her hands on her 8th birthday. Not a toy, not a pellet gun, a proper .22 caliber trainer that kicked just enough to demand respect. He had taught her breathing too, but his lessons were about the space between heartbeats, the moment of perfect stillness before a trigger pull when the whole world narrowed to a single point of focus. Both parents had shaped her into something that did not fit anywhere. Too quiet for the other military kids on base. Too strange for civilians who did not understand why a teenage girl spent her weekends at the rifle range instead of the mall. She existed in the spaces between worlds, belonging to none of them. The photograph on her nightstand showed her father in dress blues, the same calm eye she saw in her own mirror every morning. He had been dead for 3 years now. Training accident, the official report said. She had been there when it happened, had watched him fall, had held his hand while the light left his eyes. The memory lived in her chest like a shard of glass that cut whenever she breathed too deep. Her uncle's quarters on Naval Base Guam were small but clean, a temporary home that had stretched into 2 years. Kenji Tanaka was her father's younger brother, a logistics officer who had never seen combat and never wanted to. He had taken her in without hesitation when she had nowhere else to go, had given her space to grieve and room to grow, and asked only that she stay out of trouble. She was not staying out of trouble now. The radio equipment in his home office was technically off limits to anyone without proper clearance. Kaya had figured out his passwords within a week of arriving. She did not listen often, just sometimes when the silence of her room grew too heavy and she needed to hear the voices of people doing something that mattered. Tonight she had heard something that made the blood freeze in her veins. Blackwater 6, SEAL Team designation. Coordinates that placed them on Pagan Island, 300 miles north. Ambushed, dying, No help coming for 4 hours. She knew Pagan. Her father had taken her there once, a diving trip to explore the underwater caves and lava tubes that honeycombed the volcanic island. She remembered the black sand beaches, the jungle-covered ridges, the crystal-clear water that had secrets in its depths. She remembered thinking it was the most beautiful and dangerous place she had ever seen. The rifle case under her bed had not been opened in 6 months. She pulled it out now, her hand steady despite the hammering of her heart. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay her father's M40A5. He had carried it through 3 combat deployments, had customized every component with the obsessive precision of a man whose life depended on his tools. The Marine Corps had tried to reclaim it after his death, but somehow the paperwork had gotten lost. Somehow Uncle Kenji had made sure it found its way to her. She ran her fingers along the stock, feeling the slight where her father's cheek had rested thousands of times. The scope was military grade, capable of reaching out past 1,000 meters with surgical precision. She had not fired it since the day he died, had not been able to bring herself to shoulder the weapon without feeling his ghost beside her, correcting her stance, reminding her to breathe. "Kaya, what are you doing?" She turned to find Uncle Kenji in the doorway, still in his uniform from a late shift. His eyes moved from her face to the rifle case to the radio equipment with its telltale glow. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed immediately by fear. "You heard the transmission," he said. "It was not a question. They are going to die. 12 Americans are going to die on that island, and no one is coming to help them. There is nothing you can do. You are 17 years old. You are a civilian. This is not your fight." She met his eyes and saw her father looking back at her. Kenji had the same face, the same quiet strength, but he had chosen a different path. Logistics instead of combat. Safety instead of sacrifice. She did not judge him for it, but she was not him. "I can get there in 3 hours if I take the whaler. I know those waters. I know that island, and I can shoot." Kenji crossed the room in 3 strides and gripped her shoulders. His hands were trembling. "Do you understand what you are saying? Those are trained killers on that island. 40 or 50 of them," the radio said. "You would be one girl against an army. I would be one sniper they do not know exists. I will be the thing they are not looking for. Dad always said the most dangerous weapon is the one the enemy does not know about." "Your father is dead," Kenji said, and his voice cracked on the word. "He died because he took risks. Because he always had to be the hero. I will not watch his daughter die the same way." Kaya felt the familiar pain twist in her chest, but she did not look away. Dad died in a training accident. He died because of bad luck and equipment failure. He did not die being a hero. He never got the chance. She pulled free of her uncle's grip and began loading her pack with methodical precision. Ammunition, water, first aid kit, the waterproof case that would keep the rifle dry during the swim, her wetsuit from the closet, the one she used for deep dives. Kenji watched her, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. He was a rule follower, a man who believed in chains of command and proper procedure. Everything she was planning violated every regulation he had sworn to uphold. But he was also her father's brother. And somewhere deep down, buried under years of playing it safe, there was a Tanaka who understood that some things mattered more than rules. "The whaler has a full tank," he said quietly. "There is a channel between the reefs on the east side of Pagan. Less current, easier approach." Kaya stopped packing, looked at him. "Your father made me promise." Kenji continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before his last deployment, he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you had the chance to become who you were meant to be. I thought that meant college. A normal life." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "But he knew you better than I did." She crossed the room and hugged him. He held her tight, this man who had given her a home when she had nothing, and she felt him shaking with the effort of letting her go. "Come back," he said. "Whatever happens out there, you come back." "I will." 30 minutes later, the small boat was cutting through dark Pacific waters, its running lights extinguished. A 17-year-old girl at the helm with a sniper rifle beside her and 300 miles of ocean ahead. Behind her, the lights of Guam faded into the darkness. Ahead, somewhere in that vast black expanse, men were dying. She pressed the throttle forward and felt the boat surge beneath her. Commander Yegor Volkov stood on the volcanic ridge and watched the bunker below with the patience of a man who had learned that death was rarely urgent. The Americans were trapped, wounded, running low on ammunition if his count of their return fire was accurate. They had perhaps 2 hours before they would be unable to mount any meaningful resistance, and then his men would simply walk in and finish the work. He lit a cigarette, cupping the flame against the Pacific wind, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The ambush had been flawless. His intelligence source had provided exact timing, exact coordinates, exact team composition. 12 elite operators had walked into his kill zone like lambs to slaughter. 2 dead in the first volley, several more wounded. The rest pinned up in a concrete tomb that their grandfather's enemies had built 80 years ago. There was poetry in that, he thought. Americans dying in a Japanese bunker on a forgotten island, killed by Russian guns paid for with Chinese money. The world had grown complicated since his days in Spetsnaz, but certain fundamentals remained constant. Power flowed to those willing to use violence. Everything else was decoration. His radio crackled. "Commander, the woman is secure. She has stopped struggling." Volkov drew on his cigarette. Dr. Yuki Harrington had been the mission's primary objective, extracted from a CIA safe house in Okinawa 3 days ago. The SEALs had been sent to retrieve her, unaware that Volkov had been tracking the operation from its inception. She was worth $50 million to the people who wanted her back. More importantly, she was worth something far greater to the people who wanted her silenced. "Keep her alive," he replied, "but remind her what happens if she attempts escape again." The doctor had secrets in her head. Secrets about biological weapons programs that certain governments had officially abandoned but unofficially continued. Secrets that could embarrass powerful people, topple regimes, trigger international incidents. Volkov did not care about the politics. He cared about the payday and about one other thing. Somewhere in that bunker below, men wearing the same uniform as the team that had killed his brother in Yemen 4 years ago were slowly bleeding out. Dmitri had been the better soldier, the one their mother had loved more openly, the one who had never disappointed their father. An American sniper had put a bullet through his eye from 800 meters while he led a perfectly executed ambush of his own. Volkov had spent years learning everything about that SEAL team, had tracked their deployments, their tactics, their individual service records. And when this opportunity had presented itself, when the Americans had chosen to send SEALs to recover the scientist, he had known that fate was offering him a gift. The specific team below was not the one that had killed Dmitri, but they wore the trident. They carried the same arrogance, the same belief that they were untouchable. Watching them die slowly, knowing that no rescue would come, knowing that their legendary brotherhood could not save them, filled a hollow space in his chest that had been empty for years. His second in command, a former Serbian intelligence officer named Lazarevic, approached with a tablet displaying thermal imagery. They are clustered in the main chamber. One heat signature is cooling. They have lost another one. Volkov nodded. Tom was his ally now. Every minute that passed, the Americans grew weaker. He had 3 sniper teams on overwatch, 40 infantry in prepared positions, and enough ammunition to fight for days. The only variable was the rescue force that would eventually arrive, but his secondary teams had staged diversionary attacks across 3 island chains. American assets were scattered and confused. By the time anyone reached Pagan, there would be nothing left to save. "Pull back the forward positions another 50 meters," he ordered. "I do not want any of our men killed by desperate fire. Let them waste their ammunition on shadows." Inside the bunker, the shadows were growing longer and the hope was fading with the daylight. Gecko had stopped groaning, which was not a good sign. Prophet had his hand on the young operator's chest, counting the shallow breaths that came further and further apart. The tourniquet had stopped the arterial bleeding, but the kid needed surgery, blood transfusion, real medical care. He needed things that were 300 miles away. "Chief," Morrison said from his position near the entrance. "They're pulling back." Hendricks moved to look, his boots scraping against concrete dust and old debris. Through a crack in the bunker wall, he could see the enemy fighters withdrawing to new positions further up the ridge. Not retreating, consolidating. They were settling in for a siege because they knew they had already won. The radio had gone quiet an hour ago. Archangel had run out of reassurances. The last transmission had been a promise that assets were being repositioned, but everyone in the bunker knew what that meant. Command was writing them off. Too many resources stretched too thin. The math did not work in their favor, so the math would be allowed to play out. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield sat against the far wall, his officer's composure finally cracking around the edges. He was a good leader, solid under fire, but there were limits to what leadership could accomplish against impossible odds. He had led his men into an ambush, and now he would watch them die one by one. That knowledge was eating him alive. Prophet checked his ammunition count for the 5th time, as if the numbers might have changed. 3 magazines for his sniper rifle. Maybe 15 minutes of sustained fire, if he was careful. The others were in similar shape. They had gone in light for a quick extraction. Nobody had planned for a prolonged firefight against a company-sized element. "Hey," Reyes said from somewhere in the darkness. His shoulder wound had stiffened, but he was still functional, still trying. "Remember that time in Fallujah when Rodriguez bet he could eat an entire jar of ghost peppers?" Prophet snorted despite himself. The memory surfaced unbidden. Rodriguez, sweating and crying, refusing to quit while the entire team watched in horrified fascination. His face looked like a tomato for 3 days, Morrison added. Medical thought he was having an allergic reaction. For just a moment, the bunker felt less like a tomb. These were his brothers, the men he had trained with and bled with and trusted with his life. If this was the end, at least he was not facing it alone. The moment passed. Reality reasserted itself. Gecko's breathing hitched and then resumed its shallow rhythm. Outside, the enemy waited, and time continued its relentless march toward zero. 300 miles south, Kaya Tanaka pushed the whaler's engine to its limit. The boat slammed across the swells, each impact jarring her bones, salt spray stinging her eyes. She had covered 100 miles in the first 90 minutes, but the sea was getting rougher as she moved north. She had done the calculations in her head. 3 hours to reach Pagan. Another hour to approach undetected. Maybe 30 minutes to get into position. She would arrive in darkness, which was both advantage and danger. The enemy would not see her coming, but she would be navigating volcanic caves by memory and moonlight. The rifle case beside her was waterproof, rated to 100 meters depth. Her father had bought it from a special operations supplier, one of his few extravagances. Now it would keep his weapon dry while she swam through the lava tubes that she remembered from that diving trip years ago. She thought about the men in that bunker. They did not know she existed, did not know help was coming. They were professionals, trained to keep fighting until the last breath, but even professionals needed hope. She wished she could tell them to hold on, wished she could promise that someone was coming. Instead, she focused on the horizon and pushed the throttle harder. The island rose from the black Pacific like the spine of some sleeping giant, its volcanic ridges cutting harsh silhouettes against a sky dusted with stars. Kaya killed the engine a mile offshore and let the boat drift while she studied the terrain through her father's binoculars. What she saw made her stomach clench. Lights moved along the ridgeline. Not flashlights, but the disciplined flickers of tactical illumination, brief flashes that spoke of military precision. She counted positions, estimating numbers, and the math was worse than she had imagined. At least 40 visible contacts spread across elevated positions, overlapping fields of fire covering every approach from a beach. These were not amateurs. These were professionals who had turned this island into a fortress. She lowered the binoculars and forced herself to breathe. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Fear is just information. It tells you to pay attention. What you do with that attention is what separates the living from the dead. The bunker was barely visible from this distance, a dark smudge against the jungle line where the SEAL team was making its last stand. Occasional muzzle flashes sparked from its interior, answered by disciplined return fire from the surrounding positions. They were still fighting, still alive, but for how much longer? She anchored the whaler in a rocky cove hidden from direct observation and began her preparations. Wetsuit first, the familiar neoprene embracing her body like a second skin. Then the waterproof rifle case, its straps adjusted to ride across her back without impeding her movement. Weight belt calibrated to achieve neutral buoyancy at depth. Mask and fins. No tank. She would not need one for what she had planned. The lava tubes. She remembered them from that trip with her father. Underwater caves carved by ancient volcanic activity, tunneling through the island's rocky foundation. The main entrance was on the east side, hidden beneath an overhang that would be invisible to anyone watching from above. The tubes ran for nearly half a mile before opening into a hidden grotto on the island's interior, emerging in a freshwater pool surrounded by jungle. It was a path that did not exist on any map, a ghost entrance that would deposit her behind enemy lines with no one the wiser. It was also one of the most dangerous dives she had ever contemplated. She slipped into the water, and the Pacific swallowed her whole. The temperature shocked her despite the wet suit, cold fingers reaching through neoprene to grip her bones. Above her, the stars disappeared as she submerged, replaced by darkness so complete it felt solid. She oriented herself by memory and began to swim. The entrance to the lava tube was exactly where she remembered, a yawning mouth in the volcanic rock that seemed to exhale cold current. She paused at its threshold, equalizing the pressure in her ears, slowing her heartbeat to conserve oxygen. 7 minutes. That was her limit in still water under controlled conditions. This was neither still nor controlled. She gave herself 5 minutes to make the transit. She entered the darkness. The tube was narrow at first, barely wide enough for her shoulders, the rifle case scraping against volcanic rock as she pulled herself forward. No light penetrated here. No sound except the rush of blood in her ears and the distant pulse of the ocean behind her. She swam by feel, fingertips tracing the walls, trusting the map in her memory. The darkness was absolute, not the darkness of a closed room or a moonless night, but something deeper, something that had never known light. It pressed against her eyes like a physical weight. Panic whispered at the edges of her mind, ancient instincts screaming that she was buried alive, that the walls were closing in, that she would never see the surface again. She thought of her father, thought of his hand on her shoulder at the rifle range, his patient voice explaining the mechanics of breath control. "You are not fighting the water," he would say. "You are becoming part of it. Let it carry you." She let carry her. The tube widened after what felt like an eternity, but was probably 90 seconds. She found a rhythm, pulling herself along with powerful kicks, the rifle case a familiar weight across her back. Her lungs began to ache around the 3-minute mark, that deep burn that signaled depleting oxygen. She ignored it, pushed forward, trusted the process. At 4 minutes, the passage opened into a larger chamber, and she sensed rather than saw the change in space around her. The water felt different here, less constrained, carrying hints of organic matter that suggested proximity to the surface. She angled upward, following the subtle current, and her head broke the surface just as her lungs reached their absolute limit. She gasped. The sound echoed off invisible walls in the darkness. For a long moment, she simply floated, sucking air into screaming lungs, letting her heart rate settle from its frantic gallop. She had made it. The hidden grotto. She was inside the island's perimeter with no one aware of her presence. Moonlight filtered through a crack in the cavern roof, enough to reveal the freshwater pool and the rocky shore where she could climb out. She pulled herself onto the stones and lay there in the darkness, water streaming from her wet suit, the rifle case digging into her spine. Then she heard the gunfire. It was distant but intense, a sustained exchange that spoke of desperation. More shots than before. More frantic. Something had changed at the bunker. Something bad. She stripped off her fins and retrieved the rifle from its case. Her father's weapon felt alive in her hands, familiar as her own heartbeat. She checked the action, verified the scope was undamaged, loaded a magazine with fingers that did not tremble despite everything. The jungle between her and the bunker was perhaps 400 meters of darkness and hostile terrain. Beyond that, 40 or more enemies who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her presence. She was 17 years old, alone on a volcanic island at the edge of the world, about to insert herself into a firefight between professionals. She thought about Gecko, the wounded man whose name she had heard on the radio. Thought about the others, strangers she had never met who were dying right now, while she lay on cold stone, catching her breath. She stood, adjusted the rifle across her back, and began to move through the darkness toward the sound of guns. The jungle swallowed her as completely as the ocean had, but this time she was not swimming blind. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver patches, enough to navigate by, and she moved with the patience her father had drilled into her. Slow as smooth, smooth as fast, every step deliberate, every motion controlled. She smelled them before she saw them. Cigarette smoke and gun oil, and the sour tang of men who had been in position for hours. She froze, sinking into the shadow of a fallen tree, and watched a two-man patrol pass within 20 meters of her position. They were talking quietly in a language she did not recognize, their weapons held with casual confidence. She waited until they disappeared into the jungle. Then she continued her climb toward the ridgeline, toward a vantage point that would let her see the entire battlefield below. What she found when she reached it made her breath catch in her throat. The bunker was surrounded. Muzzle flashes sparked from at least 30 positions, pouring fire into the crumbling concrete structure. And in the center of it all, illuminated by the strobing light of combat, she could see a single figure standing upright on the ridge. A commander, watching his trap close around its prey. She raised her rifle and put her eye to the scope. The crosshairs settled on the commander's chest, and Kaya's finger found the trigger. One shot. She could end this right now. Take the head off the snake and watch the body thrash itself to death. But even as the thought formed, the man moved. He stepped behind a boulder, disappearing from her sight line, as if he had sensed her attention. She held her breath, waiting for him to reappear, but the moment stretched into 10 seconds and then 30, and he remained hidden. She shifted her scope to scan the battlefield below. The bunker was taking fire from multiple elevated positions, muzzle flashes winking like malevolent stars across the ridgeline. She counted shooters, identified the most dangerous threats. 3 machine gun positions providing suppressive fire. 2 sniper teams on overwatch. A squad maneuvering toward the bunker's eastern wall where the concrete had crumbled enough to create a potential breach point. That squad was the immediate threat. If they reached that wall, they would be inside the bunker within minutes. The SEALs did not have minutes. She remembered her father's voice from a training session years ago. They had been on a hillside in Hawaii, paper targets arranged at varying distances, and he had asked her which one she would shoot first. The closest one, she had answered. Wrong. You shoot the most dangerous one. Distance does not equal threat. A man at 500 meters with a machine gun is more dangerous than a man at 50 meters with a pistol. Think tactically, not geometrically. The machine gunner on the left flank was the most dangerous. His position gave him a clear angle on the bunker entrance, and his sustained fire was keeping the SEALs pinned while the assault squad advanced. She adjusted her aim, calculated the distance at roughly 600 meters, and felt the familiar stillness descend over her body. Between heartbeats, that was where the shot lived. The space between one pulse and the next, when the body was perfectly still, when the rifle became an extension of her intent. She fired. The recoil was a firm push against her shoulder, familiar as a handshake. Through the scope, she watched the machine gunner slump forward over his weapon, his body going limp in the way that only death could achieve. The gun fell silent. For a moment, nothing happened. The other shooters continued their fire, unaware that something had changed. Then someone noticed the silent gun. A shout went up in that unfamiliar language. Heads turned toward the fallen man. Kaya was already shifting to her second target. The sniper on the eastern ridge was scanning for the source of the shot, his own scope sweeping the terrain. She did not give him time to find her. The second bullet took him through the throat, and he toppled backward out of his elevated position, his rifle clattering down the volcanic rocks. Now they knew. Now they understood that something was wrong. She heard the commander's voice carrying across the distance, sharp with authority, and suddenly the pattern of fire changed. Some guns continued their assault on the bunker, but others were turning outward, searching the jungle and ridgelines for the unknown shooter. She rolled left, abandoning her position just as bullets began tearing through the vegetation where she had been lying. The rounds cracked past her head, close enough that she felt the displaced air, and she pressed herself into a depression in the volcanic rock while her heart hammered against her ribs. They were good. They had triangulated her position from the muzzle flash within seconds. These were not amateurs. These were trained killers who knew exactly how to hunt a sniper. Inside the bunker, Prophet heard the distinctive crack of a precision rifle that was not his own. 2 shots, 2 distant impacts, and suddenly the machine gun that had been chewing up their cover fell silent. "Someone is out there," he said. Hendricks looked at him like he had lost his mind. "What are you talking about?" "Sniper. Not one of ours. Not one of theirs. Someone just dropped their machine gunner and one of their snipers." The chief's eyes narrowed. "That is impossible. There is no one else on this island." But even as he spoke, they could hear the change in the enemy's fire pattern. Some of the guns were pointing away from the bunker now, searching for a new threat. Someone was out there. Someone was helping them. "Whoever you are," Hendricks muttered under his breath, "keep shooting." Kaya was trying. But moving and shooting were not the same thing, and right now moving was more important. She crawled through undergrowth, thorns tearing at her wetsuit, volcanic rocks scraping her elbows raw. Behind her, she could hear men crashing through the jungle, hunting her with the efficiency of a pack closing on wounded prey. She found a shallow ravine carved by ancient lava flows and dropped into it, pressing herself against the cold stone. Footsteps passed within 10 meters of her position. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness above her head. She held her breath, counting seconds, waiting for the shout of discovery that would mean her death. It did not come. The hunters moved on, their search pattern carrying them past her hiding spot. She allowed herself 3 breaths. Then she began crawling through the ravine, working her way around the enemy's search perimeter toward a new position. On the ridge above the bunker, Commander Volkov listened to his men's reports with growing unease. 2 dead, both killed by precision rifle fire from an unknown position. His teams had swept the likely sniper hides and found nothing but disturbed vegetation where someone had been lying. 1 shooter. That was all. 1 shooter had appeared from nowhere and was now playing ghost in his jungle, killing his men and disrupting his carefully planned operation. The SEALs did not have external support. He had confirmed that. Every American asset in the theater was engaged with his diversionary operations. So who was this phantom? Lazarevic appeared at his shoulder. "We found tracks near the eastern grotto. Small feet. Lightweight. Someone came through the lava tubes." Volkov felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Pacific wind. The lava tubes. He had not considered them as an infiltration route. Had not believed anyone could make that swim in darkness and emerge combat effective on the other side. "Find this person," he said quietly. "Whoever they are alone. They are 1 sniper against 40 men. Sweep the grid and bring me a body." Inside the bunker, Morrison suddenly gasped and went still. Prophet turned to find the man slumped against the wall, a bullet hole in his forehead from a round that had found its way through a crack in the concrete. Random fire. Bad luck. The mathematics of combat catching up with another name on the roster. Morrison was gone, just like Vasquez and Kowalski before him. 3 dead now, and the night was not over. Prophet turned back to his firing position, grief compressed into a hard knot in his chest. Somewhere out there, their unknown ally was still fighting. He could hear the occasional crack of that unfamiliar rifle, followed by the chaos of enemy response. Whoever they were keeping the pressure off the bunker. Dr. Yuki Harrington had stopped struggling hours ago. The zip ties around her wrists had cut deep enough to draw blood, and the guard watching her had made it clear what would happen if she attempted escape again. So she sat in the darkness of the command tent, listening to the radio chatter, and understood that men were dying because of what she knew. The SEAL team had come for her. 12 Americans had inserted onto this island to bring her home, and now most of them were dead or dying in a concrete bunker while Russian mercenaries closed the noose. All because she had decided to defect. All because she had chosen conscience over country. She had spent 15 years in the Russian bioweapons program, working at facilities that officially did not exist on projects that were never documented. She knew the locations of stockpiles that the international community believed had been destroyed decades ago. She knew the formulas for agents that could kill millions. She knew the names of scientists in a dozen countries who were secretly continuing research that treaties had supposedly ended. That knowledge was why the Americans wanted her. It was also why certain people in Moscow wanted her dead, and why Commander Volkov had been contracted to ensure she never reached American soil. The tent flap opened and Volkov entered, his face carved from shadow and cold purpose. He looked at her the way a butcher might examine a carcass, calculating value and cost. "Your rescue has failed," he said in accented English. "Your protectors are bleeding out in a hole in the ground. By morning, this will be over." Harrington met his eyes. "You do not understand what you are doing. The people who hired you, they do not want me silenced because I am a defector. They want me silenced because of what I can prove." Volkov shrugged. "What you can prove is not my concern. It should be." She leaned forward despite the pain in her wrists. "I have documentation of an active program. Not historical. Active. They're manufacturing weaponized agents right now. Enough to kill the population of a major city. If I do not reach the Americans, if that evidence does not get out, millions of people could die." For the first time, something flickered in Volkov's expression. Doubt, perhaps, or simple curiosity. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I am the one who designed the delivery system." Harrington's voice cracked. "I'm the one who made it possible, and I'm trying to stop it before they use what I created." Volkov studied her for a long moment. Then he turned and left the tent without another word. Whatever he believed, it did not change his mission. The money was already in escrow. The contract was already signed, and the ghost sniper in his jungle was a more immediate concern than apocalyptic hypotheticals. Kaya had worked her way back toward the eastern side of the island, using the network of lava tubes and volcanic fissures to move unseen beneath the enemy's search grid. Her wetsuit was torn in a dozen places, her skin scraped raw by volcanic rock, but she was alive and she was still in the fight. She emerged from a narrow crevice onto a ledge overlooking the bunker from a new angle. From here, she could see the enemy positions more clearly, could identify the command structure, could plan her next shots. She could also see that the situation had deteriorated. The SEALs' return fire had become sporadic, conserving ammunition that must be running critically low. The assault squad she had disrupted earlier had regrouped and was preparing for another approach. And on the ridge above, she could see Volkov conferring with his officers, gesturing toward the jungle where she was hiding. They were hunting her systematically now. She could see the search teams moving in grid patterns, cutting off her avenues of retreat one by one. Volkov was good. He was adapting to her presence, treating her as a serious threat rather than a nuisance. She needed to communicate with the team in the bunker, needed to coordinate rather than simply react. But she had no radio, no way to reach them except through the language of gunfire. Then she remembered. Morse code. Her father had taught her, drilling the dots and dashes in her memory during long afternoons when the weather was too bad for shooting. Military operators would know it too. If she could signal them, they could signal back. She aimed at a bare patch of volcanic rock 50 meters from the bunker entrance, a spot where the impact would be visible but would not endanger the men inside. 3 quick shots. 3 slow shots. 3 quick shots. SOS. The universal signal for distress, but also an announcement of presence. Inside the bunker, Prophet saw the bullet strike the rock in a precise pattern. He recognized the rhythm immediately. "Chief, the sniper. They are signaling us." Hendricks moved to where he could see the impact points. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. They're asking if we read them. Prophet grabbed his rifle and aimed at a dead tree visible through the bunker entrance. He fired twice in quick succession, paused, then fired twice more. An acknowledgement. Yes, we read you. The response came back immediately. A longer sequence this time, and Prophet translated as the shots rang out. One shooter. Coming to help. Hold position. Hendricks let out a sound that might have been a laugh in a world where laughter still made sense. One shooter. They had one person out there against 40-plus enemy combatants, and that one person was telling them to hold on. Ask who they are, he said. Prophet signaled the question. The response made him blink and check his translation twice before he was certain he had understood correctly. Chief. He turned to face Hendricks. They say they're 17 years old. The silence in the bunker was absolute. On the ridge, Volkov had also been watching. He had seen the pattern of shots, had recognized the Morse code communication, and now he understood something that changed everything. The sniper and the SEALs were not working together by coincidence. They were coordinating. The ghost in his jungle had come specifically to rescue the trapped Americans, which meant this was not a random complication. This was an enemy combatant who had somehow infiltrated his operation. A 17-year-old, his translator said, still monitoring the exchange. The sniper claims to be 17. Volkov considered this information, evaluated it, and smiled for the first time since the ambush had begun. Then we are hunting a child, he said. A gifted child, but a child nonetheless. They will make mistakes that an adult would not. They will tire faster. Their nerve will break. He turned to Lazarevic. Set a trap. Use the woman as bait. Our little sniper seems to have a hero complex. Let's see how far that heroism extends. 10 minutes later, Kaya watched through her scope as two guards dragged a stumbling figure into the open ground between the bunker and the main enemy position. A woman, handbound, face bruised. They forced her to her knees in the moonlight, completely exposed. Then one of the guards put a pistol to her head and began to count, loud enough for the sound to carry across the battlefield. 10, 9, 8. Kaya understood immediately. They were using the hostage to draw her out, forcing her to choose between her concealment and an innocent life. The rational move was to stay hidden, to preserve her tactical advantage, to accept that one life could not outweigh the mission. But she could see the woman's face through her scope. The terror, the resignation, the desperate hope that someone might save her. 7, 6, 5. Kaya shifted her aim from the guard's center mass to his head. A smaller target, a harder shot, but a clean kill that would drop him before he could pull the trigger. 4, 3. She exhaled slowly, finding the stillness between heartbeats. 2. She fired. The guard's head snapped back, and he crumpled before his finger could tighten on the trigger. The woman screamed and threw herself sideways, rolling toward the nearest cover while the second guard fumbled for his weapon. Kaya's second shot took him through the chest, and then the night erupted with gunfire as every enemy position opened up on her muzzle flash. She was already moving, sliding down the rocky slope into a crevice that offered momentary protection. Bullets cracked overhead, showering her with volcanic debris, and she pressed herself flat against the stone while the world tried to kill her. The woman had made it to cover. Kaya had seen her crawl behind a fallen tree before the return fire had forced her to break contact. One innocent saved, one trap defeated. But Volkov would not make the same mistake twice, and now he knew exactly how she would react when lives were on the line. She worked her way through the darkness, putting distance between herself and the kill zone, and tried to slow her racing heart. The shot had been clean, the execution flawless. But her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline crash hitting her body like a wave. She had killed 4 men tonight. 4 human beings who would never go home, never see their families, never breathe again. She knew they were enemies, knew they would have killed her and the SEALs without hesitation. But the weight of it settled on her shoulders like wet concrete, heavy and suffocating and impossible to shake. Her father had warned her about this. The night before his final deployment, sitting on the porch of their Hawaii home, he had spoken about the cost of the life he had chosen. Taking a life changes you, he had said, even when it is justified, even when you have no choice. Something inside you shifts, and it never shifts back. The best you can do is make sure the lives you take are worth the piece of yourself you lose. She had not understood then. She understood now. The memory of that night led inexorably to the memory of what came after. 3 weeks later, the training range at Camp Pendleton. Her father had brought her along to observe a live-fire exercise, a chance to see professional snipers at work. The accident had happened so fast. A weapon malfunction, a round cooking off in an overheated chamber. Her father had seen the danger before anyone else, had thrown himself toward a young Marine who was standing in the blast zone. He had saved the boy. He had not saved himself. Kaya had been 50 meters away when it happened, close enough to see him fall, close enough to hear the shouting, the desperate calls for a medic, the terrible silence that followed. She had run to him, pushed through the crowd of stunned Marines, and found him lying in the dust with blood pooling beneath his body. His eyes had found hers. He had tried to speak, and then the light had faded, and Staff Sergeant Keone Tanaka was gone. She blamed herself, not for the accident, but for freezing in the aftermath, for standing paralyzed while others tried to save him, for being too slow, too shocked, too useless to do anything but watch her father die. That paralysis had haunted her for 3 years. Every night she relived those frozen seconds, wondering if she could have done something differently, wondering if she could have applied pressure to the wound, kept him conscious, bought him a few more minutes. Tonight, she was not freezing. Tonight, she was fighting. And somewhere in the violence and fear, she felt the ghost of her father's approval. Inside the bunker, Prophet was working on Gecko with the desperate focus of a man who refused to accept defeat. The young operator had regained consciousness, which was both good news and bad. Good because it meant his brain was still functioning. Bad because now he could feel the damage to his leg, and his screams had to be muffled to avoid giving away their position. He needs surgery, Prophet said to Hendricks. The artery is holding, but there is too much tissue damage. If we do not get him out in the next 2 hours, he loses the leg. Maybe his life. Hendricks looked at the entrance of the bunker at the death zone beyond. Even if help arrived right now, how would they extract him? The enemy controlled every approach. Any helicopter that tried to land would be shot out of the sky. Then the Morse code started again. Shots impacting the rock face in a measured rhythm. Prophet translated as the message came through. Wounded status query. Can you move him? Hendricks grabbed Prophet's rifle and signaled back. One critical. Cannot walk. Need clear extraction path. The response took longer this time, as if the sniper was thinking. When it came, Prophet had to read it twice to believe what he was seeing. Will clear east approach. Wait for signal. 3 flares means go. Chief, Prophet said slowly. They're going to create an extraction corridor. 1 sniper against all those guns. They're going to draw fire so we can move Gecko. That is suicide. Hendricks moved to a crack in the wall where he could see the battlefield. The enemy positions on the eastern slope were the lightest, maybe 8 or 10 shooters, but they were dug in and they had clear sight lines. Taking them out would require the sniper to move through open ground, exposing themselves to fire from multiple angles. Whoever was out there, they were offering to trade their life for Geckos. He could not let that happen. Could not accept that kind of sacrifice from a stranger, from a 17-year-old child who had no obligation to be here. He signaled back a single word. Negative. The response was immediate. Not your choice. And then the shooting started. Kaya moved like her father had taught her, flowing between positions with a speed that prioritized survival over comfort. She fired from one angle, relocated before the return fire arrived, fired again from a completely different position. To the enemy, it must have seemed like multiple shooters, a coordinated assault rather than one desperate girl with a rifle. She dropped 2 more fighters on the eastern slope, then a third. The survivors began to panic, unsure where the shots were coming from, and their disciplined fire pattern collapsed into chaos. But the other positions were responding now, pouring rounds into the jungle where they thought she was hiding. She felt a bullet tug at her wet suit, close enough to leave a burning line across her ribs. Another round shattered the rock inches from her face, driving stone fragments into her cheek. She kept moving, kept shooting, kept buying time for the men in the bunker to move their wounded brother. Inside, Hendricks made the call. "We move now. Reyes, you and Prophet carry Gecko. Everyone else provides cover fire. We get to that tree line, and we do not stop." They burst from the bunker entrance into the hellfire of combat. Gecko screaming despite the gag in his mouth. Everyone running with everything they had. Bullets cracked past them, but the enemy fire was scattered, unfocused, drawn away by the relentless sniper who was sacrificing everything to give them a chance. Kaya saw them running, saw Gecko being carried between two operators, saw them reach the tree line and disappear into the relative safety of the jungle. She allowed herself one breath of relief. Then the bullet took her in the shoulder and spun her off her feet into darkness. Pain brought her back, white-hot and screaming, radiating from her left shoulder like fire spreading through dry wood. Kaya opened her eyes to darkness and jungle canopy and the distant sound of gunfire that seemed to come from underwater. She was still alive. That fact surprised her more than the pain. Her left arm would not respond properly, hanging useless at her side, but her right hand found the wound by instinct. Through the torn wetsuit, she felt blood, warm and steady, but not the arterial spray that would have meant death. The bullet had passed through the meat of her shoulder, missing bone and major vessels by millimeters. Lucky, impossibly lucky. She forced herself to sit up, biting down on a scream that wanted to escape. The rifle lay beside her where it had fallen, scope intact, action undamaged. Her father's weapon had survived, even if she was not sure she had. The battlefield had shifted while she was unconscious. Minutes had passed, maybe more. The enemy fire had concentrated on the tree line where the SEALs had retreated, which meant they had not found her body. They thought they had killed her, or at least taken her out of the fight. They were wrong. She retrieved the rifle with her good hand, awkwardly bracing it against a root to check the chamber. One round seated, 2 magazines remaining in her pack. Maybe 30 shots total if she was careful. 30 shots to finish what she had started. On the ridge above the main enemy position, Commander Volkov stood in the pre-dawn darkness and contemplated his adversary. The sniper had gone silent after that last exchange, but he refused to believe they were dead. This ghost had survived too much already, had proven too resourceful, too determined. Lazarevic approached with a status report. 12 casualties confirmed. 3 more wounded seriously. The Americans have consolidated in the secondary jungle position with their wounded. Volkov nodded absently, his attention fixed on the dark terrain below. 12 of his men killed by one shooter. A 17-year-old girl, if the intercepted communication was accurate. It seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. "I have commanded men for 20 years, he said quietly. Spetsnaz, mercenary units, professional killers from a dozen countries. I have never seen anything like this. She is wounded, Lazarevic offered. Perhaps dead. No. Volkov shook his head. Not dead. I would feel it if she were dead. This one has a fire in her that does not extinguish easily. He turned to face his second in command. She reminds me of my brother. Dmitri had the same quality. That absolute commitment to the fight, regardless of odds or cost. It is what made him magnificent. It is what got him killed. The comparison seemed to trouble him, stirring something beneath the cold professionalism he wore like armor. When we find her, he continued, she dies quickly, cleanly. She has earned that much respect. Lazarevic said nothing, but his expression suggested he did not share his commander's sentiments. In the jungle below, the SEALs had established a defensive perimeter around Gecko and the woman they had recovered from the enemy position. Dr. Harrington was conscious now, her wrists freed from their bindings, helping Prophet apply field dressings to the wounded. She says she is a scientist, Hendricks told Whitfield in a low voice. Russian bioweapons program. Claims she has evidence of an active production facility. Whitfield's expression hardened. That is why they hit us so hard. That is why they knew we were coming. Someone very high up wanted her silenced. And now they know about the sniper, Prophet added. He was scanning the jungle through his scope, searching for any sign of their mysterious ally. She went silent 20 minutes ago. After the last exchange, the words hung in the air like a death sentence. They all knew what that silence likely meant. Then movement caught Prophet's eye, a figure emerging from the undergrowth, moving with painful slowness, one arm hanging limp. He tracked the shape through his scope and felt his breath catch in his throat. "Chief, it is her." Hendricks moved to Prophet's position and looked through his own scope. What he saw defied explanation. A girl, clearly young, her wetsuit torn and bloodied, crawling toward their position with a rifle clutched in her good hand. Her face was pale from blood loss, her jaw clenched against obvious pain, but her eyes were clear and focused. She was still fighting. "Cover her," Hendricks ordered. Everyone with a weapon covering fire on those enemy positions. "We bring her in." The SEALs opened up with everything they had left, pouring rounds into the enemy lines while Prophet sprinted from cover to reach the wounded sniper. He found her collapsed behind a fallen tree, breathing in short gasps, blood soaking through the makeshift bandage she had tied around her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "I am Prophet. You're going to be okay." Her eyes found his. Up close, she looked even younger than he had expected, but there was something ancient in her gaze, something that had seen too much. "Gecko," she managed. "Did he make it?" "He made it. Because of you." Prophet scooped her up as gently as he could, feeling her stiffen against the pain. "Now we get you out of here." He carried her back to the perimeter, bullets cracking overhead, and laid her down beside the other wounded. Hendricks appeared over them, his weathered face showing something that might have been awe. "You were 17, he said. It was not a question." Kaya nodded, her strength fading now that she had reached relative safety. "And you came to rescue us." "Alone. My father was a Marine." She closed her eyes against a wave of dizziness. "He taught me that you do not leave anyone behind." The words hit the SEALs like a physical blow. This child, this girl who should have been worrying about homework and college applications, had swum through underwater caves and killed a dozen professional soldiers and taken a bullet to save men she had never met. Because her father had taught her about honor. Prophet looked at Hendricks. The chief's eyes were wet. "We need to get her off this island," Hendricks said. His voice had changed, hardened with new resolve. "All of them. We hold until extraction arrives, and we make sure they all get home." But even as he spoke, the enemy was moving. Volkov had seen the sniper's position revealed, had seen her carried into the American perimeter, and now he knew exactly where all his targets were gathered. The final assault would come with the dawn. 30 remaining mercenaries against a handful of wounded operators and one extraordinary girl. The mathematics had not changed, but something else had, something intangible that shifted the balance in ways that numbers could not measure. On the ridge, Volkov raised his own rifle and peered through the scope at the distant tree line. He could not see the sniper from this angle, but he knew she was there, wounded, vulnerable, still dangerous. He would end this personally, one sniper against another, the way his brother would have wanted it. Dawn came to Pagan Island like a wound opening across the horizon, red and angry and full of promise. Kaya watched it through half-closed eyes, her shoulder throbbing with each heartbeat, her body running on fumes and willpower alone. Prophet had dressed her wound properly, stopped the bleeding, but she had lost blood and the infection would come if she did not get real medical attention soon. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the enemy massing on the ridgeline, visible in the growing light. What mattered was the 30 guns that would soon turn this patch of jungle into a killing ground. "How long until extraction?" she asked. Hendricks checked his radio. "Archangel says 90 minutes. They have assets inbound, but the diversionary attacks slowed everything down. 90 minutes. An eternity. They would be overrun in 20. Kaya pushed herself to a sitting position, ignoring the protests of her damaged body. She still had one good arm. She still had her father's rifle. And she still had something that Volkov did not know about. "The stream," she said. "Where does it go?" Prophet looked at her with confusion. "What stream?" "There's a freshwater stream that feeds into this jungle. I remember it from when my father brought me here. It flows down from the volcanic springs and empties into the ocean through an underwater outlet on the north shore. Hendricks studied the terrain. I see it. 20 meters to our left. What about it? Kaya met his eyes. It connects to the lava tube network. If I can reach it, I can surface behind their main position. Hit them from an angle they are not expecting. You can barely stand, Prophet said. Your shoulder is destroyed. You cannot swim through underwater caves in your condition. I do not need to stand. I need to float. And I do not need 2 arms to pull a trigger. The SEALs exchanged glances. The plan was insane. A wounded 17-year-old proposing to swim through volcanic caves and single-handedly flank a professional military force. It should have been dismissed immediately. But they had seen what she could do. They had watched her kill a dozen men and save their wounded and take a bullet without stopping. If anyone could pull off the impossible, it was the girl who had already done it 3 times tonight. Hendricks made the decision. We give you covering fire in 10 minutes. Make it count. Kaya nodded and began crawling toward the stream, every movement sending lightning bolts of pain through her shoulder. Prophet appeared beside her, pressing something into her good hand. His sidearm, a compact 9mm. For close work, he said, in case the rifle is not enough. She tucked the pistol into her belt and kept moving. The stream was cold and clear, flowing over volcanic rocks toward some hidden destination. She slipped into the water and let the current take her, her wounded arm floating uselessly beside her while her legs provided propulsion. The underwater passage was narrower than the lava tube she had used before, but shorter. She held her breath and pulled herself along the rocky bottom, following the flow of water toward the distant sound of surf. Her lungs burned. Her shoulder screamed. Her vision began to narrow at the edges. Then she was through, bursting from the underwater outlet into a hidden cove on the island's north shore. She gasped for air, treading water with her legs alone, and oriented herself by the sound of gunfire. The attack had begun. She could hear the SEALs' weapons hammering away, drawing the enemy's attention southward while she circled behind. Volkov's men were focused on the jungle position, pouring fire into the trees where they believed all their enemies were trapped. They had no idea she was behind them. She crawled onto the rocky shore and found a firing position among the boulders. From here, she could see the enemy's rear echelon, the command post where officers coordinated the assault, the ammunition bearers and radio operators who kept the attack functioning. She raised her father's rifle with her one good arm, bracing it against the rocks, and began to shoot. The first round took out a radio operator, cutting communications between Volkov and his forward teams. The second dropped an ammunition bearer, scattering crates of rounds across the volcanic soil. The third and fourth found officers, men giving orders who suddenly had no voice and no authority. Panic rippled through the enemy ranks. They had prepared for a frontal assault against a fixed position. They had not prepared for death reaching from behind, invisible and unstoppable. Men began to turn to search for the new threat, and in doing so they exposed their backs to the SEALs in the jungle. Hendricks saw the confusion and seized the moment. "Advance," he roared. "Take them now." The SEALs burst from cover, Prophet and Reyes and the others pouring fire into the disorganized enemy, while Kaya continued her methodical destruction from behind. The mercenaries were caught between 2 fires, trapped in a crossfire they had never anticipated. Men began to run. The professional discipline that had made them so dangerous evaporated in the face of unexpected reversal. They fled toward the beach, toward the boats that had brought them, toward any escape from the killing ground that pagan island had become. Kaya tracked them through her scope, dropping runners when she could, letting others go when the shot was not clean. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, her strength fading with every trigger pull, but she kept firing until the rifle clicked empty. It was over. The mercenary force was broken, scattered, fleeing for their lives. Of the 40 men who had ambushed the SEALs, perhaps a dozen were still alive, and those were running for the horizon as fast as their legs could carry them. Prophet reached her position first, finding her slumped against the rocks with an empty rifle and a smile on her bloodied face. "You did it," he said. You actually did it. We did it, she corrected. Then her smile faded. Where's Volkov? The question hung in the air for a terrible moment before the answer came crackling over the radio. Hendricks' voice was tight, with barely controlled fury. He has the scientist. Pulled her from our position during the chaos. He is heading for the eastern cliffs with a gun to her head. Kaya closed her eyes. The victory she had fought so hard for suddenly felt hollow. They had broken the enemy force, saved the SEALs, survived against impossible odds. But Volkov had Dr. Harrington, and with her, he had the secrets that could kill millions. She forced herself to stand, swaying on her feet, and retrieved Prophet's pistol from her belt. Where are the eastern cliffs? She asked. Prophet stared at her like she had lost her mind. You cannot be serious. You're done. You have nothing left. She started walking east, leaving bloody footprints on the volcanic rock. I have enough, she said. I have to have enough. The eastern cliffs rose 200 feet above the churning Pacific, volcanic rock carved by millennia of wind and waves into jagged spires and treacherous ledges. Kaya followed the trail of disturbed vegetation and occasional blood drops. Her father's empty rifle slung across her back, Prophet's pistol gripped in her one functional hand. She found them at the cliff's edge. Volkov stood with his back to the ocean. Dr. Harrington pulled tight against his chest as a human shield. His pistol was pressed to her temple, his eyes scanning the jungle for the threat he knew was coming. When Kaya emerged from the tree line, he actually smiled. There you are, he said. My little ghost. I was wondering when you would appear. Kaya stopped 20 meters away, the pistol at her side. At this distance, with one hand against a hostage situation, she had no shot. Volkov knew it too. His smile widened. You are remarkable, he continued. Truly. 17 years old, and you have killed more of my men tonight than entire military units have managed. Your father must have been an exceptional teacher. The mention of her father sent ice through her veins, but she kept her voice steady. Let her go. It is over. Your men are dead or running. There is nowhere left to go. Volkov laughed, a cold sound that matched the wind whipping off the ocean. Nowhere to go. You are right about that. But I'm not trying to escape anymore. He pressed the gun harder against Harrington's temple, making the scientist whimper. I'm trying to complete my contract. The people who hired me wanted this woman silenced. If I cannot deliver her alive, dead will suffice. The information she carries could save millions of lives. The information she carries could embarrass powerful people. That is what matters in this world. Not lives. Power. Volkov's eyes never left Kaya's face. You are young. You still believe in heroism, in sacrifice meaning something. I believed that once too. Before I watched my brother die for nothing in a desert that no one remembers. Your brother was a killer. Like you, my brother was a soldier. Like you. Volkov's voice softened almost imperceptibly. We are not so different, you and I. We both fight for what we believe in. We both have lost people we loved. The only difference is which flag we salute. Kaya felt the words land, felt the uncomfortable truth in them. She had killed tonight, had taken lives without hesitation, without remorse. Did that make her a hero or a monster? Was there even a difference anymore? Then she remembered Gecko, carried to safety by his brothers. Morrison, dead from a random bullet. The SEALs who had fought beside her, bled beside her, treated her as one of their own despite knowing nothing about her except that she had come to help. There was a difference. There had to be. The difference, she said slowly, is that I am trying to save lives. You're trying to end them. Volkov shrugged. Perhaps. But in this moment, the only life that matters is hers. He jerked Harrington slightly, making her cry out. And you cannot save her. Not with that pistol. Not with one arm. Not from this distance. He was right. The mathematics were impossible. 20 meters with a handgun, shooting one-handed, her body trembling from blood loss and exhaustion. Even her father could not have made that shot. But her father had taught her something that Volkov did not understand. Something about the space between heartbeats, about the moment when fear and doubt fell away, and there was only the target and the trigger and the absolute certainty that the bullet would find its home. She raised the pistol. Volkov laughed again. You will hit the woman. You will kill the very person you're trying to save. Is that the legacy you want? Following in your father's footsteps right into tragedy. The words were designed to shake her, to remind her of the training accident that had taken her father. But they had the opposite effect. They reminded her of why he had died. He had thrown himself toward danger to save someone else. He had not frozen. He had not calculated odds. He had simply acted because that was who he was. That was who she was too. Kaya let her breath out slowly. The world narrowed to a single point. Volkov's face behind Harrington's shoulder. The gun pressed to the scientist's temple. The wind off the ocean that would push the bullet left if she did not compensate. Her father's voice whispered in her memory. Between heartbeats, that is where the shot lives. She found the space, found the stillness, found the absolute certainty that came from years of training and a lifetime of love poured into every lesson her father had ever taught her. She fired. The bullet crossed 20 meters in a fraction of a second. It passed within inches of Harrington's ear, close enough that the scientist would later say she felt the heat of its passage. It struck Volkov in the right eye, snapping his head back, ending his life before his brain could register that death had arrived. His body crumpled. His pistol clattered on the volcanic rock. And Dr. Yuki Harrington, the woman whose knowledge could save millions, fell to her knees, sobbing with relief. Kaya walked forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She kicked Volkov's weapon away from his lifeless hand, confirmed that he was truly dead, and then turned to the scientist. "You are safe now," she said. "It is over." Harrington looked up at her with tear-streaked eyes. "You're just a child." Kaya thought about the weight of the lives she had taken tonight. The blood on her hands that would never fully wash away. The piece of herself that had shifted, just as her father had warned, and would never shift back. She said quietly. "I'm not anymore." Prophet reached them first, bursting from a jungle with his rifle raised, ready for a fight that was already finished. He saw Volkov's body, saw Harrington kneeling safely on the ground, saw Kaya swaying on her feet with an empty pistol and the distant look of someone who had traveled very far and was not sure how to come back. He caught her as she fell. "Easy," he said, lowering her gently to the ground. "I have got you. You're done now. You can rest." She looked up at the sky, watching the dawn paint the clouds in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere out there, helicopters were approaching. Rescue was finally coming. She had done what she set out to do. "Did I make him proud?" she whispered. "My father. Do you think he would be proud?" Prophet thought about what he had witnessed tonight. A 17-year-old girl who had swum through darkness, killed without hesitation, taken a bullet and kept fighting, and saved every life that could be saved. "Kid," he said softly, "every father who ever lived would be proud to call you his daughter." The helicopters came out of the rising sun like angels of deliverance, their rotors beating the air into submission as they descended toward Pagan Island. Kaya watched them through half-closed eyes, her head resting in Prophet's lap, her wounded shoulder wrapped in layers of bandages that were already soaking through with red. "2 Black Hawks and a medical evacuation bird," Prophet said. "The cavalry finally arrived." "Better late than never," Hendricks replied. His voice carried none of the bitterness the words might have implied. They were alive, against all odds, against every calculation of probability and reason. They were alive, because a 17-year-old girl had decided that some things were worth dying for. The first helicopter touched down on a flat stretch of volcanic rock, and suddenly the clearing was full of fresh soldiers and medics, and the organized chaos of a military extraction. Kaya felt herself lifted onto a stretcher, felt needles slide into her arm as 4 lines were established, felt the warm blanket of morphine begin to dull the edges of her pain. A face appeared above her. A medic, young and earnest, his eyes widening as he assessed her wounds. Gunshot to the left shoulder, through and through. Significant blood loss. Multiple lacerations and contusions. He looked at her with something approaching disbelief. "How are you still conscious?" "Stubbornness," she managed. "Family trait." Someone laughed. It might have been Prophet. The sound seemed to come from very far away. They loaded her into the medical helicopter alongside Gecko, whose color had improved slightly now that real medical care was at hand. He reached out with a trembling hand and found hers, squeezing weakly. "They told me what you did," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "You saved my life. You saved all of us." Kaya squeezed back. "Just returning the favor. Your brothers came for you. I just helped." "No." Gecko's eyes were bright with tears. "You're not just help. You're one of us now. Whatever you need for the rest of your life, you call. We will come." The helicopter lifted off, and Pagan Island fell away beneath them, shrinking from a battlefield to an island to a speck in the vast blue Pacific. Kaya watched it disappear and felt something release in her chest. The weight of the night, the accumulation of fear and violence and desperate determination, began to lift as the distance grew. She slept. When she woke, she was in a hospital bed on Guam, surrounded by white walls and beeping monitors and the antiseptic smell of modern medicine. Her shoulder was wrapped in clean bandages, her arm immobilized in a sling, and in 4-drip was feeding fluids and antibiotics into her system. Uncle Kenji sat in a chair beside her bed, his face lined with exhaustion and worry and something else. Something that looked like pride. "Hey," she said. Her voice came out as a croak. "Hey yourself." He leaned forward and took her good hand, holding it like he was afraid she might disappear. "You scared me half to death." "Sorry." "No, you are not." She smiled despite everything. "No, I am not." Kenji was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Your father would have been so proud of you." He paused to collect himself. "I was wrong to try to keep you from this. Wrong to think that a normal life was what you needed. You are his daughter in every way that matters. You were born for this." Kaya felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but made no move to wipe them away. "I miss him." "I know. So do I." Kenji squeezed her hand. "But he lives on in you, in what you did out there, in the lives you saved." They sat together in silence, the weight of shared grief and shared hope filling the space between words. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Hendricks entered, followed by Prophet, Reyes, and Lieutenant Commander Whitfield. They were cleaned up, their wounds treated, but they still carried themselves with the weariness of men who had stared death in the face and somehow walked away. Hendricks approached the bed and stood at attention. "Miss Tanaka," he said formally, "on behalf of the United States Navy and SEAL Team 4, I want to express our deepest gratitude for your actions on Pagan Island. You demonstrated courage, skill, and selflessness that would be extraordinary in any soldier. In a 17-year-old civilian, it is nothing short of miraculous." Kaya felt her cheeks flush. "I just did what needed to be done. You did more than that." Hendricks relaxed slightly, the formal mask slipping. "You swam through underwater caves in pitch darkness. You killed 15 enemy combatants. You took a bullet and kept fighting. You saved Dr. Harrington and the intelligence she carries." He shook his head slowly. "I have been doing this for 15 years. I have never seen anything like what you did." Prophet stepped forward. "What the chief is trying to say is that we owe you our lives. All of us. And that is not a debt we take lightly." The other SEALs nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the same mixture of respect and disbelief that had been there since they first learned who their mysterious rescuer was. Whitfield cleared his throat. "There will be official recognition, of course. Your actions will be classified for security reasons, but certain people at very high levels are aware of what you accomplished. Doors will open for you, Miss Tanaka, if you want them to." Kaya looked at her uncle, then back at the SEALs. The offer hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Training, recruitment, a future in the world her father had inhabited. "I need time," she said finally, "to heal, to think, to figure out who I am now." Hendricks nodded. "Take all the time you need. But when you are ready, if you are ever ready, you know where to find us." He extended his hand, and Kaya shook it with her good arm. The grip was firm, the gesture one of equals rather than a seasoned warrior acknowledging a child. "One more thing," Prophet said. He pulled something from his pocket and pressed it into her palm. A challenge coin, worn smooth by years of handling, bearing the trident emblem of the Navy SEALs. "You earned this," he said. "You're family now. Always." Kaya closed her fingers around the coin, feeling its weight, understanding its meaning. She had gone to Pagan Island to save strangers and had found brothers instead. The SEALs filed out, leaving her alone with her uncle and the soft beeping of hospital machines. Through the window, she could see the Pacific stretching toward the horizon, blue and endless and full of possibilities. Somewhere out there, her father was watching. She was certain of it. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she had finally made him proud. 2 weeks after Pagan Island, Kaya stood on a beach in Hawaii and watched the sun sink toward the Pacific. The sling was gone from her arm now, replaced by physical therapy exercises as she performed with the same discipline her father had taught her. The wound would scar, the doctors said, a permanent reminder of the night that had changed everything. She did not mind. Scars told stories. Hers told a story worth remembering. Uncle Kenji stood beside her, his feet bare in the warm sand, his eyes fixed on the same horizon. He had taken emergency leave to bring her here, to the island where she had been born, to the beach where her parents had scattered her mother's ashes after she passed from cancer when Kaya was 12. It felt right to return to this place. To close the circle. "I received a call from Washington yesterday," Kenji said. "A woman named Director Chun. She asked about you." Kaya watched a pelican dive into the waves and emerge with a fish. What did she want? She wanted to know if you might be interested in a very particular kind of education, the kind that leads to a very particular kind of career. Kenji paused. "I told her you were still healing." "What else did you tell her?" "I told her that when you were ready, the decision would be yours. Not mine. Not theirs. Yours." Kaya smiled. The girl who had left Guam 2 weeks ago would not have believed that her uncle could say such words. But that girl had also never swum through underwater caves or killed 15 men or taken a bullet for strangers. People changed, sometimes in the space of a single night. Dr. Harrington's testimony had already begun to reshape the intelligence landscape, according to the classified briefings Kaya had been allowed to attend. Russian bioweapons programs were being exposed. International pressure was mounting. The information that Yuki Harrington carried in her head was doing exactly what she had hoped it would do. Saving lives. Preventing catastrophe. It had been worth it. All of it. A figure appeared on the beach path, walking toward them with a familiar gait. Prophet had traded his tactical gear for civilian clothes, but he still moved like a predator, all coiled energy and situational awareness. He had asked permission to visit, and Kaya had granted it without hesitation. "Beautiful spot," he said as he reached them. "I can see why you wanted to come back. My father proposed my mother here," Kaya said, "right on this beach. He told me the story 100 times. Prophet nodded, understanding the significance without needing it explained. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. "This arrived at the hospital after you were discharged. The team wanted you to have it." Kaya opened the box and felt her breath catch. Inside, nestled against dark fabric, lay a bronze star medal. The citation beneath it was brief but powerful. "For extraordinary heroism in connection with combat operations against an armed enemy." "I cannot accept this," she said. "I'm not even military." Prophet shrugged. "Neither was the award ceremony. Officially, this medal does not exist. Officially, you were never on Pagan Island. But the people who matter know what you did, and they wanted you to have something tangible to prove it." Kaya lifted the medal from its box, feeling the weight of it in her palm. Such a small thing to represent such an enormous night. But symbols mattered. Her father had taught her that too. "How is Gecko?" she asked. "Walking again. Physical therapy is brutal, but he is too stubborn to quit. He asked me to give you a message." Prophet smiled. "He said to tell you that he expects you at his wedding next spring. He is marrying his high school sweetheart. Says you're the reason he will be there to say his vows." The tears came without warning, sliding down Kaya's cheeks in warm streams. She did not try to stop them. Some tears were earned. Some tears were necessary. Prophet put a hand on her good shoulder. "You saved 8 lives that night, Kaya. 8 men who will go home to their families, watch their kids grow up, grow old with the people they love. That is your legacy now. That is what your father's training created. She wiped her eyes and looked out at the ocean. The sun was almost gone, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful to be real. Somewhere beyond that horizon, there were more battles to fight, more lives to save, more impossible situations that needed someone crazy enough to swim through darkness. She was not ready yet, but she would be someday. If you connected with this story, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you have witnessed similar courage in real life. They stayed on the beach until the stars emerged, three figures silhouetted against the fading light. Uncle Kenji, who had learned to let go. Prophet, who had found a new sister in the most unlikely of places. And Kaya, who had gone to rescue strangers and discovered herself instead. When they finally walked back toward the car, Kaya paused at the edge of the sand and looked back one last time. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, washing away footprints, smoothing rough edges, carrying secrets to shores unknown. Her father had brought her to this beach when she was 8 years old and placed a rifle in her hand for the first time. He had told her that shooting was about more than hitting targets. It was about discipline, control, knowing when to act and when to wait, knowing that every bullet carried responsibility. She understood now what he had really been teaching her. Not how to kill, but how to protect. Not how to fight, but how to serve. Not how to be a weapon, but how to be a guardian. The rifle was still on Pagan Island somewhere, lost in the chaos of that final night. She would need a new one eventually. Something that was hers alone, not inherited, not borrowed. Something that marked the beginning of her own story rather than the continuation of her father's. But that could wait. For now, she had a sunset to remember and a future to imagine and a peace that she had finally earned. She turned and followed her uncle up the path, leaving the ocean behind. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, but Kaya did not feel small beneath them. She felt exactly the right size, exactly who she was meant to be. Her father had made her a sniper. Pagan Island had made her a warrior. The future would make her a legend. But tonight, she was just a girl on a beach, grateful to be alive, surrounded by people who loved her. And that was enough. That was more than enough.